no scientist has all the answers. But the one thing you shouldn't say is that because I don't know, therefore God did it. That's
What do you think happens when you die?
As Bertrand Russell said, I believe that when I die, I shall rot, and nothing of my ego shall remain.
That's it.
Yes.
The end. Nothing. There's nothing else.
How could it be otherwise? You have a brain, an evolved brain, which works by nerve impulses, and when that decays, what could possibly be left?
And Richard Dawkins joins me now. Richard Dawkins, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to appear on Piers Morgan Uncensored.
Pleasure.
I assume you will be uncensored.
Of course.
You've never been censored, have you?
No.
In fact, people have tried to censor you, and we're going to come to a bit of that later on. This cancel culture has even come to your door. What do you make of that? People these days not wanting to hear opinions they don't like.
I think it's very sad. I think, especially in universities, where I spent all my life, universities are places where you should be free to speak your mind and listen, even to something that you don't like. And it's very tragic that universities seem to have bought into the idea that if you don't like what you think you're going to hear from somebody, you should shut them up and refuse to let them speak.
Yeah, I mean, I find it completely baffling that at a place of education where the whole point is to test your own thought processes and to deliberately be exposed to other thoughts, we're now in a place where a lot of students feel they just don't want to hear it. They only want to hear stuff that validates their own opinion.
They use this word safe. They want to feel safe. And university is the one place where you should not feel safe.
Yes.
Certainly not intellectually
dangerous.
safe. Yes, exactly.
In terms of thinking.
Yes.
You know, I just think you want to be constantly challenged and provoked about what you believe and what you think.
You want to be physically safe, but
yes.
Intellectually you should be...
So here we are, watching universities, the supposed sanctuaries of free thought, become echo chambers. It's almost absurd at this point. Instead of being places where students should be grappling with different perspectives, universities have started to prioritize safe spaces, which, let's be honest, is really just another way to say, let's shield ourselves from uncomfortable truths. Look, I get it. No one likes to be challenged all the time. But that's the thing. Education is supposed to challenge you. It's supposed to stretch your thinking, to push you into uncomfortable territory. If you only want to hear things that affirm your beliefs, you're not learning. You're just comforting yourself with your own biases. This whole idea that universities should shield students from uncomfortable opinions is not just misguided, it's dangerous. Think about it. You're supposed to be preparing yourself for the real world. And in the real world, no one cares whether you feel comfortable or safe. The world doesn't stop to validate your opinions. It challenges them, and it forces you to adapt, grow, and evolve. Universities should be places where ideas clash, where you're forced to test your thinking and sharpen your arguments. This mindset of, I don't like that opinion, so let's cancel it, is the antithesis of what education is supposed to be.
I think the whole cancel culture, woke kind of world we live in is a fascinatingly disturbing one, and you've got strong views on it. But I want to start, because you're known as one of the world's big thinkers, I want to start with some big theme stuff. And I guess there's no bigger theme than evolution itself. And I think I'd ask a question like this. What do we know now about where we've come from? And what don't we know?
OK. We know once you've got a self-replicating entity, which nowadays is DNA, but it wasn't originally, once you've got life started, once natural selection, Darwinian natural selection has got going, then we pretty much understand the 4 billion year history of what's given rise to us and all other living creatures. We don't know how it started, and that's still a mystery, and it may always be a mystery, because it happened a very long time ago, and we may never know exactly what did happen. We know the kind of thing it had to be.
What kind of thing do you think it was?
It was the origin of a self-replicating molecule, a molecule that makes copies of itself. DNA is such a molecule, but the original one was almost certainly not DNA, because DNA is it's been called a high-tech replicator. There had to be a precursor to DNA. The laws of chemistry gave rise to a molecule which had this unusual property of making copies of itself, which mutated, changed in random ways, and that gave rise to competition between rival versions of it, and that gave rise to the whole panoply of life eventually.
OK, so I'm a Catholic. I was raised a Catholic, so I'm a religious person, which I know is anathema to you, and we'll come to that. But my arguments with atheists, historically, have always come down to one thing. And maybe you've got an answer which will persuade me of the folly of my ways.
The idea that life must have been created by a higher power because it's so complex is something we've heard for centuries. But let's be real. That argument just doesn't hold up anymore. We know that life came from a self-replicating molecule, something that evolved over billions of years, shaped by natural selection. That's it. There's no need to invoke a god here. We're constantly told that life's complexity proves there must be a creator. But if complexity requires a creator, doesn't that just shift the problem? Now we have to explain where the creator came from. And guess what? That leads to even more complexity. This is the problem with the God of the gaps argument. The more science advances, the more these gaps shrink. A god is not the answer. Natural processes are. We've seen it time and time again. When science doesn't have an answer, some people rush to fill the void with the idea of a god. But here's the thing. We don't need a supernatural explanation for natural phenomena. There is no need to cling to an outdated worldview just because we don't have all the answers yet. As science progresses, it fills in these gaps, and the need for supernatural explanations becomes less and less. This is simple. Let's follow the evidence, not just throw our hands up and say, God did it.
Which is this. What was there at the start?
We don't know. But I don't know, and you don't know.
But no human brain, unless you want to correct me, can actually comprehend nothingness, right?
No, but it's a fallacy to think that because I don't understand how it happened, therefore God did it. I mean, that's just weak.
Well, no, okay, but I'm prepared to have an open mind about this.
Yes.
But somebody did. And I just have never met a human brain that can explain to me what happened before, say you go for the Big Bang argument. What was there before? What does nothing look like?
Physicists are debating this. I'm not a physicist, but they're debating it. My point is that they don't know, and I don't know, and you don't know, and it doesn't help to postulate a God that did it.
But you're certain it's not a God, and yet you admit you don't know.
No, I'm certain that it doesn't help to postulate something very complicated at the outset, because what we've got is primeval simplicity, and from that stems everything. And what science does, it starts with simplicity, which is relatively easy to understand, and from that it develops into the whole of the universe and the whole of life. It doesn't help to start with complexity, and a creator has to be complex, whatever else he is.
The reason that I subscribe to the theory there must be a more powerful being out there than anything the human race has created is because, like I say, a human brain can't comprehend nothingness or what may have come before nothingness. We can't. We're not able to extrapolate what that is, right? I mean, no scientist can explain nothingness, can they? Plausibly.
Well, maybe they can't. You'd have to talk to a physicist. But even
Could you explain it?
No, I'm not a physicist. But
you're a very smart guy, and you're a very vehement atheist.
No, I'm not. I'm not that vehement.
Well, you're pretty vehement. I mean, you just think all belief in all gods is ludicrous, right?
I think that it doesn't help to introduce complexity at the outset. That's my point.
No, I get that, but
no, well, I don't think you do get it.
Well, no, I do but you're asking me to consider that my own belief in a deity that may be above human thinking and understanding and brain power that was there.
Theists love to bring this one up, as though it's the trump card that proves God exists. But here's the thing. Just because we don't know something doesn't mean we should insert a deity into the equation. We don't know exactly what happened before the Big Bang, and to be honest, it might be something beyond our comprehension right now. But that doesn't mean it must have been a supernatural being. The Big Bang Theory doesn't require God. It just means that, at some point, everything we see around us started from a singularity, and it's expanded ever since. The fact that we don't know what was there before doesn't force us to leap to the conclusion of God did it. This is a classic argument from ignorance fallacy. Just because we don't have an answer yet doesn't mean we should insert a God into the void. We're still figuring it out, and we should remain humble in acknowledging that, but that doesn't mean we make up answers based on our comfort zones.
Universally, that my theory is scientifically flawed, whereas I would throw back at you, okay, but I need to be given an alternative. I need some scientist somewhere to explain to me, right, 4 billion years, all right, but then what was there before that?
Well, scientists can't answer that, and what they say is things like it's like going north of the North Pole. I'm sure. I gather you recently introduced Stephen Hawking. He probably said that to you.
Yeah, he did actually. Yeah.
But the point is this: science can explain things starting with simplicity and working up to complexity.
No, I get that, but where science can't explain something, i.e. in the case I just gave you, is it not possible that you're all wrong on the atheist side of the argument?
We could be all wrong. But
And you might get a shocking surprise one day when you're no longer with us.
You might.
And you discover we were right all along.
It's possible.
You concede it's possible.
It's highly unlikely.
You don't know, though, do you?
No, of course I don't. Scientists take a pride in admitting what they don't know. And they don't know what happened before the Big Bang. They don't even admit that the word before means anything with respect to the Big Bang. Physicists will tell you.
But it has to. I mean,
Well, it doesn't, because that's a naive statement. Physicists will say that you do not have to say there was a time began at the Big Bang, is what some physicists will say.
Yeah, but to which I immediately respond with my basic human brain. Well, OK, if time began, when did it begin?
Well, quite.
And what was there before?
Quite.
Which is a fairly obvious question.
It is a very obvious question. It's too obvious, and physicists will tell you you're being naive.
Yeah, but they don't know why I'm...
And here's where things really start to get muddled. Theists argue that because we can't comprehend nothingness, there must be a God. It's almost like a fallback position when science doesn't have a clear answer. But this kind of thinking is really just intellectual laziness. The truth is, we don't have to understand everything to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. It's not an excuse to jump to supernatural conclusions. Sure, the origins of the universe may be beyond our current understanding, but that doesn't justify saying God did it as the ultimate explanation. The universe is complex, and while we can't explain everything about its beginnings, that doesn't mean that a supernatural being is the most plausible answer. Think about it this way. Every time we've run into a mystery in the past, we didn't just hand it over to a god. We kept digging, exploring, and questioning. And guess what? Time and time again, natural explanations have emerged. So why not keep doing that instead of retreating to an ancient, simplistic idea of a god?
Being naive. Because they can't provide any actual scientific
as you've
evidence.
just said, the human brain is not capable of grasping
Right, that's my
things.
point. So
Yes.
why is it not possible that there is a superior being, power, which many people believe in different
It's
ways?
possible there are
different
fairies
types
at the
of
bottom
God.
of the garden. I mean, all sorts of things are possible. And you can't deny that.
Well, except I've never seen fairies in the garden, have you?
No, you've never seen God either.
No, but you don't know for sure that either doesn't exist.
No, I don't know that fairies don't exist. Fairies may be leprechauns, for all I know.
Do you accept, have you got milder about this as you've got older?
Yes.
Have you got more accepting that you may be wrong? Less certain?
Well, yes, of course, a scientist may always be wrong, and that's definitely a thing that a scientist has to say. But I'm not vehement. You're provoking me to be vehement because you're taking that tone with me.
Well, you've been provoked before.
Yes.
And you've been quite vehement in response. I'm actually not trying to provoke you. I'm genuinely curious.
Yes.
Because I don't have all the answers, but I'm always sceptical of people who think they do. I don't think you do.
Absolutely not.
But your admission that you don't have all the answers, to me, is quite interesting, because it lends the possibility you might be wrong.
Well, it's not interesting. I mean, no scientist has all the answers. But the one thing you shouldn't say is that because I don't know, therefore God did it. That's a
What do you
cowardly
think
way out.
happens when you die?
As Bertrand Russell said, I believe that when I die, I shall rot, and nothing of my ego shall remain.
That's it.
Yes.
The end. Nothing. There's nothing else.
How could it be otherwise? I mean, you have a brain, an evolved brain, which works by nerve impulses, and when that decays, what could possibly be left?
So you don't believe in, for example, a spirit or a soul? None of that that's all conditional entirely on a link to an actual cerebral...
Yes, if by spirit or soul you mean something that outlasts the brain, then I do not believe in it, no.
Really?
Well,
This is something a bit more personal. Death. Many say death is not the end, that there's something greater waiting on the other side, but the reality is death is the end, and that's okay. In fact, it makes life even more meaningful. Remember this. If there's no afterlife, we don't get to live forever, so we better make the most of the time we do have. And that's what gives life its urgency and its beauty. We know this is all we have, so we live with purpose. But when you introduce the concept of an afterlife, you start to undermine this idea. You start to live in a way that doesn't truly appreciate the finite nature of life. The problem with religious beliefs in the afterlife is that it shifts your focus away from the here and now. If you're always looking to the next life, you may miss out on the full, rich experience of this one. Death is a part of life. It's sad, but it's also natural. And if you're constantly looking for a way out, some divine promise of another life, you might miss the chance to fully embrace the one you have.
How could I?
Well, people who've gone through weird sort of out-of-body, near-death experiences where they've been pronounced dead for a few minutes, they always talk about, almost all of them talk about this weird...
There's a tunnel of light at the end.
Yeah, so, I mean,
Yeah.
it could be, couldn't
Yes.
it?
Yes, well, read Susan Blackmore on that.
Would you like to be pleasantly surprised, or would you be appalled if you were wrong?
Well, I would be pleasantly surprised for a while. I don't think I'd like to live for all eternity, would you?
I don't know, it depends what it's like.
Well...
If eternity was watching, cricket at Lord's all day and watching Arsenal win every weekend, yes, give me that.
Really?
Well, if eternity is blissful and a wonderful experience, as some people believe...
I think there is something actually rather frightening about eternity. And I'd be quite glad to be spending it under a general anaesthetic.
Do you fear, given the finality of what you think death to be, do you fear it as you get older?
I fear the process of dying, but when you're dead, you don't know anything. It's just like before you were born. I think it was Mark Twain said, I was dead for billions of years before I was born and never suffered the smallest inconvenience.
But when you have loved ones who've died, for example...
That's tragic.
Yeah, but how do, as somebody who believes literally in the finality, the rotting of a body and that's it, it must be worse than for somebody like me, where I genuinely believe there's something better to come.
It's worse, so what?
Not so what, just curious, that it must be for you awful each time, far worse than it is for people who have a belief.
Yes, it is.
A lot of people take great comfort from their belief in God, that there is a different life out there.
Yes, they do. So
you don't have that sucker at all.
No.
So is it incredibly painful? More for you, perhaps, than somebody
No, I don't think so.
who is a believer?
Let me put it to you this way. If you really did believe it, wouldn't you say to the person on the deathbed, looking forward to seeing you in purgatory?
A lot of people say, looking forward to seeing you in another life, yeah.
Yes.
A lot of people say that.
You don't really believe it, though.
Actually, I do. Yeah, I do, actually. Because I find it, when I think about it in big picture, which is your great thing, I think, how likely is it that we just got put on this planet, Earth, as human beings, as a one-off kind of entity that existed here, and then you die and that's it? And it only lasted 4 billion years, and before that was absolutely nothing.
Evolution is not random and purposeless. It's a process driven by natural selection. And the beauty of it is that it doesn't need any supernatural force to explain it. We've been told time and time again that life is too complex to have happened by chance. But that's a misunderstanding of how evolution works. It's not a random process in the way people think. It's a process shaped by environmental pressures, competition, and adaptation. It's a process that works over billions of years, and it doesn't need a creator to make it happen. What's amazing is that we don't need a god to appreciate the elegance of life's design. Evolution is the reason we're here, and it's a natural process that explains our existence in a way that doesn't require supernatural intervention. This is about embracing a world where reason, evidence, and critical thinking guide us toward understanding. It's a worldview that recognizes the beauty and complexity of life without resorting to supernatural explanations. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
I'll ask you bluntly what you ask in the book, which is Islam a religion of war or peace?
Well, I'll take the first whack at that. I think we have different instincts, I think, Majid and I here, and my instincts for many conversations now are to defer to his instincts, because I think I had no interest in winning the debate for atheism against religion in my conversation with Majid. I was not trying to convince him that there is no God, or that it's illegitimate intellectually to think that the Quran is in some sense, a divinely inspired book. That's not my purpose, and though I still hold those views, the real purpose of our collaboration is to figure out some path forward politically and intellectually and ethically to arrive at a future where we're not seeing the kind of mayhem and callousness and divisiveness born of religious differences. And so, but Maajid takes the line in the book that it's neither a religion of war nor a religion of peace, it's a religion. And all religions have their toxic and their benign aspects. And it really depends on just what you emphasize. I'm a little more, I think if you just catch Maajid at that moment, if that's all he says, what he's saying is indistinguishable from many apologists who are actually playing hide the ball with the articles of faith here. People like Reza Aslan and people who are well known to just dodge the matter and who think that it is tantamount to bigotry to single out Islam for any special attention at this moment in history. But Maajid doesn't stop there, and that's why I had such a productive conversation with him. He admits that there's a link between specific ideas and specific behaviors. And so I think Islam has some specific ideas that are really problematic, which we discuss in the book. Specifically, a belief in martyrdom and a belief in jihad as incumbent upon any Muslim, certainly any Muslim male, in defense of the faith, and a certainty of paradise. I mean, this is a little dark jewel of religious demagoguery that I think we have to figure out some way to destroy intellectually. This conversation is, I think, the basis of a way forward in that direction.
So on the same question, but I want to touch on something Sam said earlier about this notion that any Muslim engaging in dialogue with a critic of Islam, with an atheist, with somebody like Sam or Ayan, is necessarily either a sellout, an Uncle Tom, a native informant, or any of the above. Yesterday, by a non-Muslim, left-wing, white, and particularly silver-spooned critic, I was called an Islamophobe. I want to address this head-on before we proceed, if I may, because I think it's disgusting to delegitimize my voice in that way. And what I would like to say to them, and I hope they're listening, is the day that you have had to dodge neo-Nazi hammer attacks on the streets of Essex, as I have, the day that you've been arrested at gunpoint and profiled by police at the age of 15, as I have, the day that you've forcibly had your DNA taken from you and profiled at airports, as I have, and the day that you face the grip of a torturer in Egypt's dungeons because of your Islamist political views, as I have, is the day you get to talk to me about Islamophobia. The day you were born to Muslim parents, are a Muslim yourself and have a Muslim child, is the day you get to talk to me about anti-Muslim bigotry. Until that day, being a non-Muslim, and particularly being a white male, to speak to me and to police my conversation about my own religion and its future in this world, and to choose for me who I'm allowed to speak to, is a form of colonial patronage that I could do without. It's a reverse form of racism. It's a policing of the conversation. It's born of a racism of low expectations, because it assumes that the only good, it's the true good Muslim, bad Muslim game, by the way, because it assumes the only good Muslim is the angry Muslim, and there happens to be a bit of a brain malfunction in the heads of these people who assume that despite the fact I've been through all of that, I'm not sitting here in front of you ranting and raving and spitting and frothing at the mouth. Therefore, because I'm not angry, somehow I'm not the good Muslim. It's patronizing in the extreme. And in particular, as I said, the two people who have named, Sam's, I think, mentioned one of them, the two people who have called me a native informant or an Uncle Tom or an Islamophobe, both happen to be non-Muslim, white, middle-class American males who haven't seen any of what I've just described. And I think they need to just stop and check their privilege, first of all. And it's sad that the debate has got to this. To very quickly answer your question, therefore, I have a right to have a view on that question. And that question, whether Islam is a religion of peace or a religion of war, for some Muslims, it's a religion of war. For the vast majority of Muslims today, it's a religion of peace. Just like for the US, for Americans, for some Americans, the US Constitution supports the right to abortion, and for others it doesn't. The same document, the same text, is the subject of dispute and fierce dispute in this instance. And one of the things that we discuss in this dialogue is that actually if Islam is only what Muslims make it through the process of ijtihad or interpretation, if the vast majority of Muslims today are not jihadists, then only because that's what Muslims are interpreting it to be, today it happens to be by majority rule a religion of peace. But that's not to say that there is an incredibly vocal and disproportionately prominent minority within our own communities of Muslims who subscribe to the view not only that it's a religion of jihad and war, but are actually fighting and engaged in that war. And it's that vocal and organized, highly organized minority, as represented by ISIS, in some instances they're controlling countries, that we must challenge head on and accept the fact they exist and not obfuscate and bury our heads in the sand and pretend that this isn't really a problem.
The Quran itself contains verses that extremists have historically taken literally. For example, Surah 9:111 promises believers paradise in exchange for fighting and killing in the cause of Allah. Surah 8:12 talks about striking fear into the hearts of unbelievers. These aren't fringe interpretations. They're written directly into the text, and history shows that when taken literally, they inspire violence. We can see this pattern throughout Islamic history. The early Islamic conquests of the 7th and 8th centuries spread by the sword, from Arabia into North Africa, Spain, and Persia. These weren't peaceful conversions. They were military campaigns justified by jihad. Fast forward to today, and groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Boko Haram cite these same texts as their blueprint. This isn't comparable to Christianity or Judaism in the same way. Yes, the Bible contains violent passages, but modern Christian majority societies don't have widespread movements killing in God's name. By contrast, Pew Research surveys show large percentages of Muslims in countries like Afghanistan, 99%, and Iraq, 91%, supporting Sharia law as the official law of the land, including punishments like stoning for adultery or death for apostasy. The science of radicalization also backs this up. Studies from scholars like Robert Pape at the University of Chicago found that suicide terrorism is most heavily concentrated in Islamic groups because of the religious promise of reward in the afterlife. That dark jewel, Harris describes, martyrdom leading to paradise, isn't an abstract idea. It's the single most powerful recruiting tool jihadists use, especially for young men with few opportunities.
And I hope everyone's read the books. Those of you who haven't read those books, there's a bad guy in the Harry Potter books called Voldemort. That people, the two things. First of all, they deny he exists, and they're also, while denying that he exists, because he's meant to be dead, but he actually isn't really dead. The second thing is they're too scared to name him. So instead what they say is, he who must not be named is dead. Now, I took that and said, look, that Voldemort effect, being too scared, too petrified to name the problem when actually it's staring at you in the face, is what's happened with Islamist extremism. And the problem is we have been unable to name the problem, led by President Obama himself all the way down. Whereas actually recently, Prime Minister Cameron, not least because we've been working through Quilliam very hard to advise him on this, but among many others, has named the Islamist ideology just last month in his speech and his intervention on this debate. I'm hoping the next president of the US does the same. What's the problem with not being able to name the problem? There are two problems here. External to Muslims and within Muslim communities. If we can't name Islamist extremism and we just say the ideology of extremism, the problem is that outside of Muslim communities, many non-Muslims will assume you're talking about Islam, the religion itself, and all Muslims. That's the first problem, because by not naming it, you're blurring those lines, and you're increasing the obfuscation. And trust me, there are a whole bunch of nutjobs out there who would take delight, who would take pleasure in stigmatizing every single Muslim, which Sam doesn't do, nor does Ayan. They don't do that. I've personally spoken to both of them about this, and in many instances watched their speeches. But there are plenty of people out there that would like to do this. So that's danger number one. By not naming it and isolating it from the religion, you're blurring those lines and making it easier for people to blame every single Muslim. The danger within Muslim communities is that by not naming the problem, we are disempowering the voices of those reforming Muslims who are attempting and struggling, who are vulnerable within their own communities and who are struggling to bring about that reform dialogue within Muslim communities. We are disempowering their voices. We are not allowing them to make the case within the religion of Islam to say the problem isn't Islam, fair enough, but there is something we have to address. And that something is this Islamist ideology that has hijacked our voice. But actually, by depriving them of that language, what are they left to say? How are they meant to have that debate? And instead what happens is every gay Muslim, every feminist Muslim, every liberal Muslim, every dissenting voice is silenced, is shut down, is stigmatized, and those who shout the loudest are the ones dominating the discourse. And then we complain when mainstream society says, where are the moderates? We're not even giving them a lexicon to have this conversation.
Sam, did you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, well, I think we should be candid about how depressing the state of the conversation is around this conversation. Because, for instance, I think at one point you said to me that you either expected or in fact were receiving more criticism with regard to talking to me than talking to Islamists or even
Absolutely,
jihadists.
yeah.
So he could go and talk to a failed suicide bomber, right?
And everyone's happy.
And that's completely legitimate use of his time, and of course we need to have conversations. How else could we move forward? But talking to famous atheists over here, that's as controversial as it gets. And that is of a piece with this liberal or pseudo-liberal criticism that both of us are getting on this topic, where people can't seem to see that, for one, that we're talking about ideas and their consequences. And everything we say about Islam or Islamism or jihadism, or depending on what the focus is, conservative Islam, applies to white converts to the faith, and it applies to people in 100 different countries and of a wide variety of ethnicities. If ever I say something disparaging about Islam compared to Hinduism or Buddhism, well, then that has nothing to do with racism or the colors of people's skin. I mean, so racism and bigotry against people based on ethnicity or the country they're born in, that has nothing to do with this conversation at all. And so this meme of Islamophobia that has been thrown up to prevent conversations of this kind is really quite destructive. And it's something that, I mean, the hypocrisy here should be just shattering to liberals in particular, because you have, as Majid just said, we are abandoning the women and the freethinkers and the gays and the public intellectuals and the apostates these are the most vulnerable people on earth in Muslim societies, where you have atheist bloggers, or not even atheist bloggers, just secular bloggers.
People like Raif Badawi.
Getting hacked to death, and liberals are not only not giving them any tools by which to better their lives, they are castigating the people who are trying to shine a light on the disproportionate nature of the problem here. To be gay, or even a woman in a country like Afghanistan, or Saudi Arabia, or Bangladesh, I mean, these are unlucky places to be in a minority of that kind. And so it's as we argue at some length in the book, liberalism has really failed us here. And it's not, and you can criticize Christianity all you want, and liberals will never bat an eye. You can criticize Mormonism all you want, but the moment you try to shine a light on the problem of, I think, appropriately described as Islamism for this conversation, just the full armamentarium of political correctness and cries of racism just hits you full in the face, and it is a thankless job. Nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to have this conversation because it is so poisonous, especially on college campuses.
History shows that ideologies grow stronger when society pretends they don't exist. For example, the Nazi Party in the 1920s was often dismissed as a fringe group until it was too late. With Islamism, the same mistake is happening. We have leaders, like President Obama at the time, who avoided even using the word. Yet groups like ISIS openly cite the Quran, including Surah 9:5. Slay the polytheists wherever you find them, as their justification. If we don't name this ideology, we give it cover. The facts back this up. Pew Research surveys show that in countries like Pakistan, 76% of Muslims support making Sharia the law of the land, and large percentages endorse punishments like death for leaving Islam. In Saudi Arabia, women cannot travel, marry, or work without male guardianship, a system enforced through religious law. Homosexuality is still punishable by death in Iran and Saudi Arabia. By refusing to call this Islamism, Western liberals silence reformist Muslims and leave minorities, women, apostates, gay Muslims, completely defenseless. Sam Harris is right. The Islamophobia label has become a shield for bad ideas. No one hesitates to criticize Christianity for opposing gay marriage. Yet when secular bloggers in Bangladesh are hacked to death for writing against Islam, Western intellectuals look away, afraid to offend. If we can't name Islamism, we can't fight it. And if we can't fight it, then the most vulnerable people, the women under veils, the apostates in hiding, the gay teenagers in fear, are the ones who pay the price.
One of the good things that's come from, for me, that's come from our dialogue is that at least I'm sensing that the emphasis has shifted from one about the metaphysical conversation about whether God really exists or not, to the political and social values that we need for just and stable societies. And that's where I'd like to see the conversation go. Because I think the metaphysical conversation about whether God exists or not is less interesting to me. What's more interesting is that you can have the Church of England in the United Kingdom, but they won't be chopping people's heads off and they won't be lashing people like Raif Badawi just for writing a blog in Saudi Arabia. And so if we can get to that stage, then we can have these conversations without fear of attack and, and lynch mobs coming to the door. So I'd like that emphasis, and I think this book leads to that. I don't know if you agree, Sam, but I think that what comes from this dialogue is that the emphasis is very clear and loud, is on reasserting liberalism and civil liberties and human rights that cut both ways. Not just in favor of minority communities, but also in certain instances, minority communities have responsibilities to others, to mainstream society, to reciprocate those civil liberties in their interactions. And I think that's the focus that I'd like to continue through these dialogues with others, to make it sort of a real focus on liberalism and values and ideas rather than whether God exists or not.
But Sam, I think that's right, and the substance of the book gets into that. Sam, though, you highlight in the book that the two basic tenets of Islam, it's hatred or rejection of infidels and this notion of a post-earth paradise, means that linking Islam with liberalism, right, with gay rights, women's rights, whatever you want to call it, may be desirable, but it's essentially based on a pretense. It's essentially intellectually dishonest. Is that fair, or do you think that they are compatible?
Well, the path forward that Majid really found in our conversation, and you'll see that it took some effort to convince me to sort of follow him through that keyhole-sized aperture in this just wall of medieval ignorance, is that basically that by the lights of Islam, there is no true Islam. There's no pope. There's no place to stand within Islam to say that your view of the faith is the truly canonical one. And so there is a radical kind of pluralism there, which reformers can take advantage of, where you can say, listen, whatever, you can be as doctrinaire as you want. You can be right of Mullah Omar in terms of your theological commitments, but what you can't be is someone who thinks that applies to all Muslims for all time. Now, I remain quite skeptical that we can have conversations with people of Mullah Omar's sort. We're not going to have a dialogue with al-Baghdadi or the rest of ISIS, but as a general matter, from Majid's side, that the way forward is to recognize that this pluralism demands a commitment to secularism. It demands, because there is no one version of Islam, you can't, you have to keep your version in this zero-sum contest with all these other versions out of public policy and out of politics. And then that commitment to secularism can hopefully open a space for genuine liberalism and a genuine commitment to all these other values that we want, which aren't best expressed in any religion, frankly. They're the result of a modern conversation about ethics and politics human rights?
Yeah, I think that's, you've just done a wonderful job summarizing my stance there, so I won't repeat it. But I think it's important, if you read the dialogue, you'll see that there are some surprising positions that traditional Islamic theologians have taken, which have been very literalist stances, but have led to very liberal outcomes. I'll just mention one, and I think it's important at this stage for me to say, look, I'm not a religious leader. I'm not even devout. I want to make that very clear. Some of you will see me, and you'll see me doing things that aren't typically devout. You know, I won't elaborate. But that's because I don't claim to be devout or religious. I am a Muslim who is not devout. Secondly, I don't speak on behalf of all Muslims. I'm not a leader for Muslims. I'm not a religious leader. I'm not a community representative. In fact, I find the whole concept of community representatives troubling and problematic. In particular, they tend to be aging men, greying men who are especially socially conservative, who deign to speak on behalf of everyone. So I don't subscribe to that model in the first place. So I don't want anyone to think what I say means all Muslims must think this. But that's part of the beauty, you see. That's exactly what I'm advocating, to open that debate up to pluralism. We have within Islamic history and theology a concept, because there's no clergy, as Sam mentioned, that if anybody subscribes to a religious injunction and they are correct, they get 2 rewards, فَلَهُ أَجْرًا. And if they are incorrect, فَمَنْ أَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ. They still rewarded 1. Because that process of legal interpretation from the scripture is not wrong if you're legally qualified to do it. And the rest of the people, known as the awam, the followers, the muqallideen, those who follow a theologian, aren't judged for whichever option they choose. So there's one example I'll give you from the dialogue that I mentioned in discussion with Sam. And that is that from the earliest exegesis of the Quran, from the earliest tafsir, the Hanafi school of law, comes a man known as Abu Bakr al-Jassas, who was the first mufassir, or the first exegete of the Quran, to elaborate and explain upon its meanings. And he took a very literalist view of the word khamr in Arabic, which is commonly translated today to mean alcohol. He took a very literalist approach to that word, and he didn't budge from its linguistic meaning, which was, and everyone concedes this point, by the way, that originally khamr only meant grape wine, the wine from grapes. It doesn't mean whiskey, it doesn't mean gin, it doesn't mean beer, it only means the wine from grapes. And the early Hanafis, which was the first school of jurisprudence, I must emphasize, the closest in the times of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, say that therefore every other form of alcohol is legal apart from grape wine. Now that sounds like a particularly outright position today when considering where the state of affairs are for the vast majority of Muslims who don't touch any form of alcohol. But I give this example not to take a position on it, but simply to emphasize something. And that is that form of pluralism that existed in those early years, that has been lost because of the rise of both fundamentalism and Islamism, and I distinguish between the two in the dialogue. The only way forward is for us to recognize that. And of course, relative to medieval periods, it may have been good, but actually there's a lot in the medieval time that we don't want to reclaim. But we have to just recognize that exists, because no one has the right to claim that they have the definitive view on any scripture, on any text. So the logical conclusion from all of this can only be secularism, because there's no pope in Islam. And that's essentially, in a nutshell, what I'm arguing in the dialogue with Sam, and what I hope that Sam has kind of recognized in what I'm saying as well.
What makes this final stretch so important is that it exposes the heart of the issue. The real challenge isn't whether God exists, but whether Islam can ever coexist with liberal values like human rights and freedom of speech. Harris is right to press the point. When you read the Quran and Hadith plainly, you don't find tolerance or universal love. You find repeated commands to separate from or even fight against unbelievers. The promise of paradise for martyrdom gives extremists a divine license to kill, and no amount of reinterpretation can erase that. History shows this clearly. Christianity, for all its dark chapters, went through the Reformation and the Enlightenment, producing societies where religion was forced out of politics. That shift allowed space for free thought and modern values to develop. Islam never had its enlightenment. Instead, it hardened around dogma, and the pluralism Majid describes was crushed by fundamentalists. Even when scholars disagreed in early centuries, like those who argued that only grape wine was forbidden while other alcohols were permissible, that kind of intellectual diversity has been suffocated by Wahhabi literalism. The reality is that because Islam has no central authority, anyone can claim their view is authentic, which means reformers are left competing with jihadists who use the same scripture. That's why Harris is right to say the only viable way forward is secularism. Liberal values, free speech, women's rights, gay rights, are not rooted in Islam. They are born out of modern secular ethics that rejected religious authority altogether. Without secularism, pluralism is just a slogan, because power always drifts back to those who enforce the harshest interpretation. And that leads us to the bigger question. Can Islam ever truly reform itself, or is secularism the only way to protect freedom and human dignity? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments, and if you value these kinds of deep conversations, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with others so we can keep the discussion alive.
Welcome to the second installment of the God Debate. My name is Michael Ray. I'm a professor of philosophy here at the University of Notre Dame and the director of the Center for Philosophy of Religion, one of the sponsors of tonight's event. The Center for Philosophy of Religion was founded in the late 1970s with the aim of promoting cutting-edge research on topics in the philosophy of religion and in distinctively Christian philosophy. One of our goals in sponsoring the God Debate series is to try to bring some of the very issues discussed among our research fellows to a wider, non-academic audience and in a format that will hopefully be fun and engaging. Our show tonight, as you already know, is a debate between William Lane Craig and Sam Harris, coming together for the very first time to discuss the question, are the foundations of moral values natural or supernatural? William Lane Craig is research professor of philosophy at Talbot School of Theology in La Mirada, California. He is best known among philosophers for his extensive and influential work in the philosophy of time and the philosophy of religion. He is known to the wider public as someone who is able to articulate and defend the doctrines of the Christian faith in a way that is highly accessible, but also philosophically and theologically rigorous. He became a Christian at the age of 16, pursued undergraduate studies at Wheaton College, and holds 2 earned doctorates, one in philosophy from the University of Birmingham and one in theology from the University of Munich. He has authored or edited over 30 books, as well as over 100 articles in professional journals of philosophy and theology. Known as one of the 4 horsemen of the new atheist movement, Sam Harris is the author of the New York Times bestsellers The Moral Landscape, The End of Faith, and Letter to a Christian Nation. The End of Faith won the 2005 PEN Award for Nonfiction. Mr. Harris's writing has been published in over 15 languages. He and his work have been discussed in Newsweek, Time, the New York Times, Scientific American, Nature, Rolling Stone, and many other journals. His writing has appeared in Newsweek, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Economist, the Times London, the Boston Globe, the Atlantic, the Annals of Neurology, and elsewhere. Mr. Harris is a co-founder and CEO of Project Reason, a nonprofit foundation devoted to spreading scientific knowledge and secular values in society. He received a degree in philosophy from Stanford University and a PhD in neuroscience from UCLA. The structure of tonight's debate will be as follows. Each debater will take 20 minutes for his opening speech, followed by rebuttals of 12 minutes and 8 minutes respectively, and then closing speeches of 5 minutes each. At the conclusion of the debate, we will have about 30 minutes for questions from the audience. If you would like to ask a question, line up behind one of the 2 microphones in front or in the balcony. We're letting Notre Dame students ask the first 4 questions tonight, so if you are not a Notre Dame student and somehow find yourself at the front of the Q&A line, please allow a student to go ahead of you. Time will be kept strictly. There is a timekeeper in the front who can be seen by both speakers, and once each speaker's time has elapsed, he will be given at most 15 seconds to finish his final sentence before being rudely interrupted by me, the time enforcer. Because we are keeping the time strict, we ask you to hold all applause and other indications of agreement or disagreement, cheering, crowd surfing, and the like, until the very end of the debate. Please remember that flash photography, videotaping, and active cell phones are all prohibited. Finally, remember that Notre Dame is the world's #1 institution in the philosophy of religion and also has one of the world's best theology departments. Any questions you don't get to ask during the 25 or 30-minute Q&A, you can ask of your local faculty in the days and weeks to come. And now on with the show.
Well, good evening. It's wonderful to be here at the University of Notre Dame, and I want to begin by
Sorry. We're going to begin each speech with me checking with the timekeeper to make sure that he's ready. And then the timekeeper is going to hit go, and then you get to go.
All right.
So you go when I say begin.
Sorry for jumping the gun.
Professor Craig gets the first word in the debate. Dr. Harris gets the last word. Timekeeper, are you ready? This is 20 minutes. Begin.
I want to begin by thanking the Center for Philosophy of Religion for the invitation to participate in tonight's debate. The question of the correct foundation of morality is one that is not only of tremendous academic interest, but also one that has enormous practical application for our lives. Now, to begin with an important point of agreement, Dr. Harris and I agree that there are objective moral values and duties. To say that moral values and duties are objective is to say that they are valid and binding independent of human opinion. For example, to say that the Holocaust was objectively evil is to say that it was evil even though the Nazis who carried it out thought that it was good. And it would still have been evil even if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in brainwashing or exterminating everyone who disagreed with them so that everybody thought the Holocaust was good. One of the great merits of Dr. Harris's recent book, The Moral Landscape, is his bold affirmation of the objectivity of moral values and duties. He inveighs against what he calls the overeducated, atheistic, moral nihilists and relativists who refuse to condemn as objectively wrong terrible atrocities like the genital mutilation of little girls.
Dr. Craig argues that objective morality needs a divine source, but this claim is flawed. It assumes that without a higher power, morality becomes meaningless, yet history shows otherwise. Societies have established moral codes long before religious doctrines even existed. The Holocaust wasn't evil just because a deity said it was. It was evil because it violated basic human dignity, something grounded in reason, not divine commands. Dr. Craig also overlooks centuries of philosophical work, like that of Aristotle, who defined morality as rooted in human flourishing, not divine will. Morality, in this sense, is dynamic, evolving alongside culture and society. So why, then, do we still rely on outdated religious frameworks to explain modern ethical dilemmas? On the flip side, Dr. Harris's perspective, though appealing, raises a crucial issue. Who decides what constitutes well-being? This concept is subjective and easily manipulated by those in power. Ultimately, morality isn't handed down by gods or defined by science. It's something we create through human experience and collective effort. The real question is, are we ready to embrace the complexity of morality, or are we more comfortable with simple, convenient answers?
Well, first let me say it's an honor to be here at Notre Dame, and I'm very happy to be debating Dr. Craig, the one Christian apologist who seems to have put the fear of God into many of my fellow atheists. I've actually gotten more than a few emails this week that more or less read, "Brother, please don't blow this." So you will be the judge. Now, as many of you know, I've spent a fair amount of time criticizing religion. And one of the perks of this job is that you immediately hear from all the people who think that criticizing religion is a terrible thing to do. And strangely, the reason people rise to the defense of God is not that there's so much evidence that God exists, but that they believe that belief in God is the only intellectual framework for an objective morality. And clearly Dr. Craig is among their number. Now, the sense is that without the conviction that moral truths exist, that words like right and wrong and good and evil actually mean something, humanity will just lose its way. That's the fear, and I actually share that fear. I've come to believe that this concern that many religious people have of the erosion of secular morality is not an entirely empty one. Now, I once spoke at an academic meeting on these themes, and I said, as I will say tonight, that once we understand morality in terms of human well-being, we'll be able to make strong claims about which behaviors and ways of life are good for us and which aren't. And I cited as an example the sadism and misogyny of the Taliban as an example of a worldview that was less than perfectly conducive to human flourishing. And it turns out that to denigrate the Taliban at a scientific meeting is to court controversy. Mm-hmm. And after my remarks, I fell into debate with another invited speaker. And this is more or less exactly how our conversation went. She said, "How could you ever say that forcing women to wear burqas is wrong from the point of view of science?" I said, well, because I think it's pretty clear that right and wrong relate to human well-being, and it's just as clear that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a way of maximizing human well-being. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. And I said, okay, well, let's make it even easier. Let's say we found a culture that was literally removing the eyeballs of every third child, okay, at birth. Would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said, it would depend on why they were doing it. So after my eyebrows returned from the back of my head, I said, okay, well, let's say they're doing it for religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness, or some such nonsense. Okay. And then she said, well, then you could never say that they were wrong. Okay, and so you should know, I was talking to someone who has a deep background in science and philosophy. She's actually since been appointed to the President's Council on Bioethics. She's one of 13 people advising President Obama on all of the ethical implications of advances in medicine and related science and technology. And she had just delivered a perfectly lucid lecture on the moral implications of neuroscience for the courts. And she was especially concerned that we could be subjecting captured terrorists to lie detection neuroimaging technology. And she viewed this as really an unconscionable violation of cognitive liberty. So on the one hand, her moral scruples were very finely calibrated to recoil from the slightest perceived misstep in ethical terms in our war on terror. And yet she was quite willing to forgive some primitive culture its fondness for removing the eyeballs of children in its religious rituals. And she seemed to me quite terrifyingly detached from the very real suffering of millions of women in Afghanistan at this moment. So I see this double standard as a problem. Okay, and strangely, this is precisely the erosion of basic common sense that many religious people are worried about. I hope it'll be clear to you at the end of this hour that religion is not an answer to this problem. Okay, belief in God is not only unnecessary for a universal morality, it is itself a source of moral blindness. Now, it's widely believed that there are two quantities in this universe. There are facts on the one hand, and of course science can give us our most rigorous discussion of these. But then there are values, which many people like Dr. Craig think science can't touch. Okay, questions of meaning and morality and what life is good for. Now, of course, everyone thinks that science can help us get what we value, okay, but it can never tell us what we ought to value. Okay, and therefore it cannot, in principle, be applied to the most important questions in human life. Questions like how we should raise our children, or what constitutes a good life. Now, it's thought, from the point of view of science, and Dr. Craig just gave voice to this opinion, that when we look at the universe, all we see are patterns of events. Just one thing follows another. Okay, and there's no corner of the universe that declares certain of its events to be good or evil, or right or wrong. Apart from us, I mean, our minds, we declare certain events to be better than others. But in doing that, it seems that we're merely projecting our own preferences and desires onto a reality that is intrinsically value-free. Okay, and where do our notions of right and wrong come from? Well, clearly they've been drummed into us by evolution. That the product of these apish urges and social emotions. And then they get modulated by culture. You take sexual jealousy, for instance. I mean, this is an attitude that has been bred into us over millions of years. Okay, our ancestors were highly covetous of one another. despite the fact that everyone was covered with hair and had terrible teeth. And this possessiveness now gets enshrined in various cultural institutions like the institution of marriage. Okay, so therefore a statement like it's wrong to cheat on one's spouse, okay, seems a mere summation of these contingencies. It seems like it's an improvisation on the back of biology. Okay, it seems that from the point of view of science, it can't really be wrong to cheat on your spouse. Okay, this is just how apes like ourselves worry when we learn to worry with words. Okay, now here is where religious people, like Dr. Craig, begin to get a little queasy, as I think they should. Okay? And many see no alternative but to insert the God of Abraham, an Iron Age God of war, into the clockwork as an invisible arbiter of moral truth. Okay, it is wrong to cheat on your spouse because Yahweh deems that it is so. Okay, which is curious because in other moods, Yahweh is perfectly fond of genocide and slavery and human sacrifice. I must say it's pretty amusing to hear Dr. Craig in his opening remarks say that I'm merely focused on the flourishing of sentient creatures on this planet. Okay, if that's a sin, I'll take it. Okay, one wonders what Dr. Craig is focused on. Now, incidentally, you should not trust Dr. Craig's reading of me. Half the quotes he provided from me, as though I wrote them, were quotes from people I was quoting in my book, and often to different effects. So you'll have to read the book. Now, in claiming that values reduce to the well-being of conscious creatures, as I will, I'm introducing two concepts, consciousness and well-being. Now, let's start with consciousness. This is not an arbitrary starting point. Imagine a universe devoid of the possibility of consciousness. Imagine a universe entirely constituted of rocks. Okay, there's clearly no happiness or suffering in this universe. There's no good or evil. Value judgments don't apply. For changes in the universe to matter, they have to matter, at least potentially, to some conscious system. Okay, what about well-being? Well, the well-being of conscious creatures and the link between that and morality may seem open to doubt, but it shouldn't. Okay, here's the only assumption you have to make. Imagine a universe in which every conscious creature suffers as much as it possibly can for as long as it can. Okay, I call this the worst possible misery for everyone. Okay, the worst possible misery for everyone is bad. Okay, if the word bad applies anywhere, it applies here. Now, if you think the worst possible misery for everyone isn't bad, or maybe it has a silver lining, or maybe there's something worse, I don't know what you're talking about. And what's more, I'm pretty sure you don't know what you're talking about either. What I'm saying is the minimum standard of moral goodness is to avoid the worst possible misery for everyone.
Dr. Harris has a strong point when he challenges the idea that God is the source of all morality. For centuries, religion has tried to position itself as humanity's moral compass. But looking at history, it's clear that this claim is less about ethics and more about control. The idea that without God, society would spiral into chaos and moral decay is nothing more than fear-mongering. It's a narrative meant to make us think that morality is only possible within the framework of religious doctrine. But history proves otherwise. Let's talk about Christianity for a second. For much of history, religion didn't stand for equality, freedom, or human well-being. It stood for submission. Women were told they couldn't speak in church, couldn't lead, couldn't own property, and couldn't challenge the patriarchy, all in the name of biblical morality. And these weren't fringe ideas. They were enshrined in Christian doctrine and practiced by the powerful. The justification for slavery? The same God that supposedly lays out our moral compass. If you think that the God of Abraham is where morality begins, you might be overlooking how that very foundation was used to justify some of the worst atrocities in human history. Dr. Craig's insistence on God's moral law as the ultimate truth misses a key point. This truth has been wielded to justify some pretty terrible things. From slavery to genocide to oppression, religion has often found itself on the wrong side of justice and equality. The Bible itself is riddled with moral contradictions. If God's laws are supposed to be the gold standard, why are they so often used to defend the worst aspects of human nature? The morality we hold dear today, the kind that promotes human rights and equality, didn't come from God. It came from brave individuals who dared to challenge the status quo. Enlightenment thinkers like Spinoza, Voltaire, and Hume weren't looking to divine authority for answers. They pushed for reason, autonomy, and human rights, ideas that frequently clashed with religious teachings. It wasn't the church that first recognized the idea of consent in marriage. That came from secular, feminist movements that had to fight against the notion that wives owed sex to their husbands, a doctrine grounded in centuries of Christian theology.
And therefore, there is no moral responsibility. So there isn't even the possibility of moral duty on his view. So while I can affirm and applaud Dr. Harris's affirmation of the objectivity of moral values and moral duties, at the end of the day, his philosophical worldview just doesn't ground these entities that we both want to affirm. If God exists, then we clearly have a sound foundation for objective moral values and moral duties. But if God does not exist, that is, if atheism is true, then there is no basis for the affirmation of objective moral values, and there is no ground for objective moral duties, because there is no moral lawgiver and there is no freedom of the will. And therefore, it seems to me that atheism is simply bereft of the adequate ontological foundations to establish the moral life.
Dr. Harris now has 12 minutes. Timekeeper, are you ready? Begin.
Well, that was all very interesting. Ask yourselves, what is wrong with spending eternity in hell? Well, I'm told it's rather hot there, for one. Dr. Craig is not offering an alternative view of morality. Okay, the whole point of Christianity, or so it is imagined, is to safeguard the eternal well-being of human souls. Now, happily, there's absolutely no evidence that the Christian hell exists. Okay, and I think we should look at the consequences of believing in this framework, this theistic framework, in this world, and what these moral underpinnings actually would be. All right. 9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Okay, picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. Okay, it's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Okay, but according to Dr. Craig, this is all part of God's plan. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil. And worse than that, on Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation. Okay, there are 1.2 billion people in India at this moment. Most of them are Hindus, most of them therefore polytheists. Okay, in Dr. Craig's universe, no matter how good these people are, they are doomed. If you are praying to the monkey god Hanuman, you are doomed. Okay. You will be tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No. It just says so in Mark 9 and Matthew 13 and Revelation 14. Okay, perhaps you'll remember from the Lord of the Rings, it says when the elves die, they go to Valinor, but they can be reborn in Middle-earth. Okay, I say that just as a point of comparison. Okay, so God created the cultural isolation of the Hindus. Okay, he engineered the circumstance of their deaths in ignorance of revelation. And then he created the penalty for this ignorance, which is an eternity of conscious torment in fire. Okay, on the other hand, on Dr. Craig's account, your run-of-the-mill serial killer in America, okay, who spent his life raping and torturing children, need only come to God, come to Jesus on death row, and after a final meal of fried chicken, he's going to spend an eternity in heaven after death.
Dr. Craig's argument that morality needs a divine lawgiver falls apart on closer inspection. First, the idea that God is the sole source of moral values presents a dangerous contradiction. If morality is only valid because God decrees it, then it becomes arbitrary, and even worse, inconsistent. Consider the millions of children suffering and dying around the world, despite endless prayers. If God is the moral foundation, then we must accept that a being with the power to intervene simply chooses not to. This is not a moral framework. It's a contradiction that undermines the very concept of justice. Second, Dr. Craig's view doesn't stand up to real-world moral concerns. According to his system, a good person born into the wrong culture or religion could be condemned to eternal punishment, while a murderer might be forgiven simply by professing the right beliefs at the end of their life. This logic is a moral disaster. It prioritizes words over actions and belief over empathy, turning justice into a cruel farce. What Dr. Craig's framework really exposes is the incoherence of grounding morality in divine command. The progress humanity has made in building a just moral system wasn't driven by religious doctrine, but by reason, empathy, and shared human experience. So the real question is, can we build a moral system based on reason and humanity, or are we stuck relying on a framework that doesn't make sense? Let us know your thoughts. What's your take on this? Do you think religion is essential for moral values, or can we develop ethics and compassion on our own? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this sparked some ideas, like subscribe and share to keep the discussion alive.